Hey everybody, Mr. Schultz here. We're getting ready to start our second set of notes for semester 2, and it's still module 7. We're going to jump right into it. It shouldn't take us too long to get through these. It's not as long as the first set, so we'll jump right into it, get it going, and get through these rather quickly. All right, so we're still on module 7. Right now we're looking at, in the first set of notes, we were looking at how to secure the crime scene. Now we're going to jump into how to properly search the crime scene. Okay, so we're going to focus on describing and implementing searching techniques, and then examine constitutional legal practices in crime scene investigation. We kind of covered a lot of the constitutional part, making sure we have a warrant and stuff last semester. And then we're also going to talk about identifying and utilizing information sources during an investigation. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. So let me jump right in here and we'll get going. All right, so assignment's going to be a series of case studies, and I will be posting them on Canvas, obviously, and you'll be able to look at them. What you're going to do is you're basically going to read the case study. It's going to give you a description of a crime scene, the type of crime that was committed, and you're going to have to kind of decide which search technique you might employ, some of the different things that you might have to do before you start searching, like making sure you have a warrant and stuff like that. And then you'll focus on how you would gather the evidence, what type of evidence you would expect to get, and information sources you can use. So it's going to kind of be an all-encompassing. There will be several of these. They'll be short. It won't be too long of a writing assignment, so we'll make that due on Friday. You should be able to get it done by then. All right, let's go ahead and jump right into the notes. So how are crime scenes searched, right? All right, so this is the big thing. And again, this is kind of where in normal circumstances we would be setting up different crime scenes on campus, and you guys would be observed by me actually searching for evidence and seeing if you could actually find the evidence, properly collect it and bag it and all that stuff. So we will get into the second part of that, which is properly collecting it. Those techniques will come later on, and we'll be using the standard operating procedures that I described last week. So since it's going to be difficult for me to observe you doing this, that's why we're going to kind of do those case studies. I'm hoping, again, if we get back on campus before the end of the year, that I'll be able to observe you doing some of this stuff later on. So the search is one of the most important tasks a crime scene investigator will undertake at a crime scene or an incident scene. A complete and systematic search must take place in order to locate all the relevant physical evidence. A lot of this evidence is going to be fragile in nature. In other words, easily contaminated or easily lost. We have to then obviously record everything we collect and collect it, and then eventually send it off to the lab for examination, and it can eventually be presented at court. But if we don't find it, right, all that other stuff isn't going to happen. If we can't find the evidence to actually, examine it in the lab and then present it in court, then it's all for naught. We got to find it first. So we have to be sure that obviously we have the necessary warrants and we've obtained those prior to searching any scene. And again, we kind of covered this last semester a little bit, but it's going to keep coming up over and over and over again from now on. So when searching a crime scene or an incident, the crime scene investigator should consider the nature of the physical evidence and the principles of exchange and transfer. This raises the question of what are we looking for? Okay, what exactly are we looking for? Now, depending on the scene, we might have some inclination as to what we're looking for, but a lot of times, some of the stuff that we're looking for might not become obvious until we find it. So here's a little thing I got from a book. Basically, one crime scene investigator recollects a question posed by a police officer at a murder scene. And the officer asked, "Can I help? Tell me what you're looking for." And the crime scene investigator kind of responded, "I don't know exactly what I'm looking for, but I will know when I find it." So that's a lot of times what's going on. You got to kind of have a keen eye, look for things that might be out of place or askew or something doesn't look right. Now, if we know it's a crime scene where there's a shooting, then it can give us an inclination as to what we might be looking for. Maybe we're looking for a gun or shell casing or a bullet hole or something to that effect. So it'll give us a little bit of guidance, but there's going to be other things that come up in the searching process where we're not really sure what we're looking for until we actually see something and we're like, aha, this is it. Okay. This is an accurate response regarding scene searching. This is a problem that crime scene investigators will constantly confront. Every crime scene will be unique and must be approached with an open mind. Okay, facts equal likely to be found. Search is to be found. So we, like I said, we can go in, and if we know it's a shooting incident, where gunplay was involved, we know what we might likely find, but until we actually find something, we have to search. Right, the search has to be ongoing. All right. So, how should evidence be collected and prioritized? So, collection of evidence should always be prioritized to minimize loss and contamination. So, we want to really collect the fragile stuff first, the stuff that could be easily lost, could be easily contaminated. We want to do those techniques first. Usually, a secure area for the temporary storage of evidence in accordance with the rules of evidence and chain of custody is established. A lot of times, that's in your command center. A systematic search pattern is then selected for collection of evidence. This is usually influenced by the size and nature of the scene, and we'll go more on search patterns later. Matter of fact, we'll spend most of these notes looking at different search patterns. When processing the scene, the investigator should select a progression of processing and collection methods so that the initial techniques don't compromise subsequent techniques or processing. So, in other words, we don't want to go in and dust for fingerprints right away, because then you're going to get fingerprint dust on everything that you're going to collect that might not need to be dusted. For example, if you have blood at the scene too, you're probably going to want to take swabs of the blood samples first before you do any kind of fingerprinting where you're going to get dust into the blood and maybe contaminate the blood samples. So the most transient evidence should always be collected first, progressing to the least transient evidence, and then moving from the least intrusive collection technique, right? Swabbing blood samples, for example, to the most intrusive techniques, putting down fingerprint dust all over everything. Kind of continuing on this, how should evidence be handled? The handling of evidence is one of the most important factors of an investigation. We have to be careful. We do not want contamination to occur. We don't want to lose it, damage it, or do anything that's going to harm the investigation. So the collection of evidence must be documented. We know that. You have to make or start a chain of custody. By recording, you have to record its location at the scene. You do this through photography, the date of collection, and who collected it. You're going to be filling that out on the evidence envelope or container, as well as establishing evidence log. For each item collected, chain of custody must be established. Care should also be taken to acquire the appropriate reference and standard material from the scene for comparison needs. So I kind of covered this last semester a little bit, just a smidget. So I'll kind of recover it again here, and we're gonna again go into more detail on this when we actually talk about the standard operating procedure for collecting different samples. But you need to also collect standard samples. In other words, if you have a substance that's on one part of a desk and it's a really long desk, let's say, well, you're going to sample the substance that you have, but you're also going to sample other areas to make sure that the standard or reference samples don't have the same contamination. Same thing would be true, for example, for soil samples or something like that. A final scene walkthrough can ensure all evidence has been collected and that all materials are not inadvertently left behind. So you want to make sure that you're not leaving something behind at the scene that belongs to the department or the lab. We'll be using a simplified version of the standard operating procedures, and I showed you these last week, right? This is going to be specifically designed for our needs using the Crime Scene Investigation Procedural Guide by Michael Maloney and Donald Hausman. That's basically my guide. And then I take bits and pieces of that and kind of pieced it together into our own standard operating procedures that we would use here at Foothill. All right, so here's the focus of the rest of the notes. We're looking at different types of search methods. All right, and I'm going to move myself over a little bit so you can see that last one a little better. An investigator should develop a plan or method appropriate to the type of scene. There's 5 basic methods that are universally accepted. And these are the strip method. Sometimes it's called the line method as well, line search. The spiral method, the wheel method, the grid, and the zone. All right, and we're going to look at each one of these one at a time. So, and we'll talk about when they might be implemented and what they're best used for, and maybe some of their strengths and weaknesses. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and we'll look at a few of these coming up. So, what pattern should you use? The search pattern to be used is often determined by basically what it is you're looking for, right? The crime scene, the nature of the incident, the nature of the physical evidence that might be present, um, your location, where you're at. Are you in a great big field looking for something in a large field where you're going to have to cover a big geographic area? Or are you in a small, tiny little room inside of an apartment or something like that? So your location, the terrain. If you're outside, what kind of terrain? Are we looking through a mountainous region? Is it a forest? Is it a field? Is it the desert or whatever? The established facts, what actually happened. This kind of guides us again. So if we know there was a shooting incident, we know we're looking for maybe ballistics evidence. If we know it was a stabbing, maybe we're looking for the knife or the weapon that was used to do the stabbing, and so on. So that's your established facts. And then the size of the scene. Is it, like I mentioned before, very small, very large? That can have a determining factor as well. So let's look at each of these patterns briefly, and we'll talk about their strengths, weaknesses, and when we might implement them. All right, we'll start with the spiral search. Spiral searches are usually, these can do one of two things. Let me pull up my little pointer here, and I'll show you guys. So they can be moving from the outside in towards the center of the scene. That's one method. But a lot of times it's actually just the opposite. We might have an object here, a gun, let's say, and we'll start spiraling from the inside where that gun is located out. And as we're doing this, we might be looking for shell casings or bullet evidence or anything else that might be related to that gun. Okay. So searches either move from the focal point outward in the spiral search or from the edges inward. Okay, usually used to locate a specific item in relationship to another. In other words, a bullet casing near a gun, as I just mentioned. Uncommon, given its limited use. So we don't usually use the spiral method. It can be used, and it's useful when we're looking at that relationship thing. Only allows one investigator at a time to kind of do this, so it's a little bit time consuming as well. All right, let's look at the next one. The zone or quadrant search, either one, you can call it either one. This is where the scene gets divided into zones and then perhaps even further divided. So you could have, for example, you could divide the entire scene. This could be a floor plan. This could be a wall as well, as we're going to see. So you might have one investigator looking in zone 1, another investigator looking in zone 2. Not only that, but we can also subdivide these. I could draw another cross here in zone 4 and divide quadrant 4 up into even smaller quadrants, right? And you could do the same thing for each of the zones. So the scene is divided into zones and then perhaps even further divided. This is generally used for larger scenes. Zones may be based on elevation, particularly at a scene involving blood spatter on walls or bullet holes. So this could be a wall that you're looking at, right? And you could divide your wall up into quadrants or even further divided, as I mentioned. And then you could be looking for bullet holes, or you could be looking for certain blood spatter patterns on the wall. And then each investigator can be assigned their own zones, and you can have as many investigators searching many investigators searching the scene at the same time, as whatever room fits, right? This again could be a huge field, and you might have 4 or 5 investigators in each one of these zones that are subdivided up, all looking for something. Other times you might have only 2 or 3 people looking at the zones. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the next one. The next one is a grid search. Sometimes this is really a thorough type of search. So this is really kind of a good one to use. You get a couple sets of eyes on it. So let's go through this one real quick. The scene is covered basically in a crisscross motion, so that the same area is covered twice, but from different angles. So if you take a look, it could be either direction. You could be starting over here. You could be starting over here. But as you're going through, you're kind of walking the scene, going back and forth in one direction. And then when you kind of get down to the end, you start walking the scene, and it's the same area, but you're going from a different angle now and going the other direction. So this is where you get that grid pattern or crisscrossing pattern. This can be carried out by 2 investigators. You could have one going back and forth this way. You could have another one going back and forth this way at the same time. This is the most thorough search because more than one person is looking at the same objects from different angles. But it's also, again, time consuming. But this is a good one to use if you're really looking for something, you think there's something critical, and you need a couple sets of eyes to kind of get it done. And then you have line or strip search. Sometimes they're called strip or line search. It doesn't matter how you call it or what you call it. Multiple investigators can be organized into a single line. So this is kind of a little bit deceiving. This is showing 2 investigators maybe going at the same time. So you have one investigator here, another investigator here, and at the same time they're kind of walking back and forth through this area. This is a lot of times used in large outdoor areas, big fields. And it doesn't have to just be 2. You could actually have 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 15, 20. It just depends on how large the scene is. And you could say, okay, we're going to have 10 people, and they're all going to be 5 feet apart, and then they're going to slowly walk through this field, kind of looking through the scene at the same time. So multiple investigators can be organized into these lines and then move in one direction in order to cover an entire scene. This pattern is usually used for outdoor scenes and for searches for large objects that would be usually outdoors. Can be done on hands and knees or on foot, depending on the size of the area. And you can actually use volunteers with this with some upfront training. So a lot of times when maybe they're looking for a body out that they got a tip that's been dumped out into a large area, you can actually get a big line of people kind of walking through. One organization that does this is like Red Rock Search and Rescue. When somebody goes missing, a lot of times they'll go out to these different desert areas around the entire southern Nevada area, and they'll actually do these line searches or search for people that might be either missing, they could be injured, they could be out there dying or dead already, and they're looking for bodies. So a lot of times they'll do these type of search patterns. All right. Then you have the wheel or ray pattern. This is basically, usually you're starting at the focal point, right? Here's the focal point. And then you have investigators kind of search in a straight line away from the focal point. Okay. And then you have another investigator that might be searching in this direction, and maybe a third investigator would be searching in this direction. So this can work, and usually after you go in one direction, you're coming back. But this can work. It's got a few problems. One of them is it's going to require usually multiple investigators. And then here's the big problem. The further away you get from the focal point, you get a larger gap between the 2 rays, right? So the spokes of the wheel kind of get further away, and there's lots of evidence that could be missed in the middle. Now you can handle that by dividing it up, and you can keep intersecting these over and over again, but it gets a little bit tedious and time consuming as well. All right, so what are the golden rules for searching? I'm going to give you 3 golden rules just to kind of make sure that you're on your toes when you do a search, right? So when scenes or items are searched, either large or small, there's 3 golden rules that should be applied to maximize the recovery of evidence. This can get really tedious, hard on you when you're really kind of focused and concentrating and trying to find specific things, especially if it's a longer search. It can get taxing mentally, and when you have, when you're fatigued mentally, you end up missing things that are important. So Search areas should be determined to maximize concentration. So you got to kind of have a plan, right? And then each area should take no more than 20 to 40 minutes to search. Don't spend much more than 40 minutes at a time searching before you take a break. After 20 to 40 minutes, you should take a break, and breaks should be taken after each search, and you should spend at least 10 minutes on a break just to kind of clear your head, and then you can go back to it. Search the same area twice so that nothing is overlooked. So if you search one area, time, as long as time is available, then go back and you can research that area, especially if you think you may have missed something or overlooked something, or you felt fatigued when you were searching that area before. And a lot of times, another good idea, and this isn't written down, but if you search one area, have somebody else that's helping you with the crime scene come in and search the same area with a different set of eyes. That can usually be helpful as well. So that's some of the searching techniques. I told you it wouldn't be too long of a set of notes. That kind of takes care of it today, and for this lesson. I will be introducing the case studies to you guys, so you guys can start working on those right away. There will be a little bit of writing involved, and we'll talk about the case studies, maybe go over the case studies in class. All right, guys, have a good day.